Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
That every single day of your life, stumbling blocks will come your way that will test your character. And this is exactly what Jesus forewarned us. It is impossible for stumbling blocks not to come. Well, what is the key to maintain and sustain our character? Solomon, he actually gives us the key in the letter of Ecclesiastes. He says this: two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. In the very beginning, God said this: it is not good for man to be alone. And then Solomon continues. I love what he says next. Look at this. He says, if either of them falls down, one can help the other up. He says, but pity the one who falls and is no one to help them up. If you long for happiness, which all the research says we do, then one of the greatest gifts you could give yourself is to be intentionally connected. Being connected is what grows our character. Connection maintains your character. And last of all, connection is absolutely the thing that helps us sustain our character.
So on Sunday, you threw Jordan and I under the bus, and
I was happy to do it.
Yep. And you talked about your version of the games, which, this is funny because Joe, our audio engineer.
Oh, yeah?
Have you heard him talk about your video game?
No.
Well, he walked in and I was like, hey, Buck's doing some video game stuff on stage, and he was like, oh, let me guess, Duck Hunt and Mike Tyson Punch Out again.
Yes.
And
why am I going to change my narrative?
It's the only narrative. Joe's been around for 10 years.
Funny.
So yeah, but we had a good laugh about it. And then, and then he was excited because he was like, oh yeah, I remember that one and that one and that one. And
yeah.
So everybody in the crowd who related with you was like, this is awesome.
I felt like there was some good energy.
Yeah. In the process of all of this video game stuff, I'm confused about what you actually played, because I've heard someone say the original Nintendo, and then I've heard someone say the NES.
Right.
Are those different or are those the same?
Well, technically they're the same.
I don't know if that's helpful.
Culturally, it's like words change over time, meaning change. Technically, it's the Nintendo Entertainment System in the 80s, but all my buddies and all my friends, none of us called it that. NES was like this, what? It's foreign term. We all were like, hey, it's a Nintendo. Hey, come play the Nintendo. So it was always like the Nintendo. And then...
But it's the first one, right?
Right. And then the next generation came up, and they started, I think even marketing, hey, the NES, trying to keep the product, trying to keep money and sales.
Yep.
And so that generation called it NES. Well, my generation's like, what's an NES? You don't call it that. You call it the Nintendo or Nintendo. And
because theirs was that makes sense though, because now there was it Nintendo 64 was next, or there's
something like that.
So they have to
Game
now
Boys came out and all that stuff.
Oh yeah,
have that.
Which if they just say Nintendo, it's confusing because now there's Nintendo this, Nintendo that, Nintendo this, so they call it the NES.
NES, which is what are you talking about? So Jordan, we were joking, as staff, Jordan was calling this NES, and he's like, Buck, technically it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know, but dude, it wouldn't make any sense to my friends or my generation.
Yeah.
That's just odd.
Well, this makes so much more sense because in my mind, if you were to tell me you played the Nintendo, I'm like, Nintendo what? The GameCube, 64, Switch.
It was everything.
Okay.
Yeah. It was. It was like there's the Ataris and Pong and things before that.
Yeah.
Which were just niche. They barely, they were good, but
But this was a game changer.
This was a cultural tidal wave. Everyone wanted it. Everyone who had it was someone.
Yeah.
And you would go to their house. And then this is this is probably a huge sociological shift, a seismic move.
Yeah.
That everyone that I was aware of generationally, Nintendo games was it. And then it never stopped. And today it's just
Yeah.
Tidal wave keeps going.
Well, the demographic has changed a lot because originally, I mean, I talked to a lot of ladies who said they had it, they played it all the time, that kind of thing. But today, I mean, you don't hear ladies talking about playing Xbox and, PlayStation and all that as much. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, even my generation, like girls just didn't play video games.
Really? Yeah. I don't know.
So
there you
anyways, I'm just really glad we could help everybody out, clear that up for my, anybody
We're here
who's
for you.
35 and under, I guess, would probably be, in that confused generation. So, but anyways, you talked about more on character this past Sunday.
That's right.
And specifically on how character is influenced through connection, and how if we are going to grow in our character, it's not something that's done alone. It has to be with other people. And, character or that connection maintains, it sustains, and you had another one in there, grows character. And so kind of those three important parts. And I mean, it's just so true. Like when you look at life and you just think about, your friends will determine the direction and quality of your life. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Like just all those kind of statements, it has to be said in a conversation about character.
Right.
And so I want to unpack it a little more, but you shared some of your own experiences around connection and how you've experienced it. I did want to ask, have you had like dry seasons of connections? And if so, like how did those affect you? How did that impact you as a person?
Yeah. Well, I was sharing on Sunday that, it's my core, I'm an introvert. In other words, by definition, I get my energy not being around people, but being alone.
Right. And
so like, as a result, when that gets out of whack or it's not healthy or it's not in a good posture, like I love to isolate. I love to go like, hey, I can figure this out on my own. And especially the more life I live, I think the more life experience, the more books I read, the more, things that happen, I'm able to accomplish in life, then it's the temptation sometimes grows to go like, hey, I'm fine. I don't need anybody.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But it's almost like that lesson I learned every single time. When I disengage from connection, I continue to like find myself, I create gaps in my life. There's something comes up and I'm like, it's all related to connection. And I think, when I'm tempted to isolate, and it ebbs and flows. There's seasons, it happens and it doesn't, happens and it doesn't. But what I find is that, at times I'll lose like perspective. So like, relational perspective. Like I'm fine in my marriage. I'm fine with the boys. I'm fine, with my friends. I'm good. But the truth is, how do I know that? Like, how do I really know that? I convince myself because I'm all alone that I'm really good. But then, when I sit down with you and you're talking about things that you're doing with Ashley, or I sit down with, I've got my group of guys that I meet with, and then they're talking about what they're doing and their relationships. All of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh. Like those are questions I do not ask Jill. Those are things that Jill and I don't experience. Like when you ask me, hey, what's something you've discovered about Jill in the last week? I'm like, I haven't discovered anything in the last like several months. I thought I was fine. And so I lose that perspective. And then I lose some self-awareness as well. Like, hey, the question you ask in part 2, what's it like on the other side of me?
You have to ask that to another person.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to have the person ask the question too.
Exactly. But I lose not only like that reflection point, but I even lose the self-awareness to the need to ask the question, because I convince myself, because I'm the only one there, that I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like, why would I ask that question? Man, look, I'm providing, I'm, loving, I, take Jill out on a date night. I try to listen to my boys, I'm fine. So like, I don't need to ask the question. So I convince myself of these things versus having somebody on the other side of me that challenges me and just holds me accountable. That's more than maintaining, my my health and maintaining my character, is to say, hey, I know you may think it, but can you ask it? And when somebody's holding me accountable to ask that question, like of my boys and of Jill, I'm like, oh man, I thought I was at a place, or I'm encouraged. Conversely, I'm like, man, I actually am. Like, I'm doing far better than perhaps I even thought. And then I do think in my times of isolation, I lose a lot of hope. Like, I think I get stuck relationally with Jill, and I convince myself there's not a lot of hope in our marriage. I get stuck relationally with my boys, and I convince myself that I'm a screw up as a father. I'm terrible. Like they're screwed up. There's no hope for them. They're just going to be a lost cause. I get those thoughts. That's kind of my demons that I carry. And I'll go down these paths pretty deep, and I'll convince myself that there's a loss of hope. And I get to this place. I'm like, what am I doing? Like there's no one around me. And when I get back in connection, I go have breakfast. I start connecting with a group of guys or get involved in a group that's really healthy for my perspective to go, oh my gosh, like, there is hope. I was stuck. Here's the piece of information I didn't have. Here's, a great book, or here's a great question, or here's a great habit that I just needed another person to reflect, to show me.
Yeah.
And then I think the same thing's true with God. I feel sometimes in a rut with God. But then, it's like I'm around people and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at what God's doing in their life, and look at how they've shared, their perspective on God, or they, read something in the scriptures and they reflected that. And I'm like, man, that is so good. What a great reminder, or a brand new thing. And then when I'm around you, I learn all the time.
Oh gosh.
So
Ruh-roh.
yeah, but it's like when I'm alone, sometimes I'm like, I don't need to read. I can just hang out. I can just chill, these kind of things.
Yeah.
And then that just intellectually is not stimulating to my ability to learn. And I may convince myself like, ooh, I'm really smart. But then when you sit down on the other side of somebody, you're like, oh my gosh, look at them. Like, look at how much they know, or look at, like, they've gotten 3 new things that they learned this week, and I haven't learned anything in 3 months. Like, honestly, if I had to be honest with myself, which is hard to do when you're alone. So anyways, those are the things I bump into when I'm not connected, but when I am connected, even though it takes energy and intentionality, man, life is so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, Ashley and I have had this moment recently where we've had our own seasons of being really connected and then not connected and then connected again. And we've just had this moment recently where we looked at each other and we were like, because we're in a good season of connection right now. Like we feel like we're just connecting with other people really well. And we've had this moment where we just said, what were we doing before? How were we operating? Like, what were we thinking? It's so, on one hand, it's like, it just creates so much accountability in your life because people see how you're parenting and how your marriage is going. And when you invite people in, it's hard to hide those things. But on the other hand too, it's just fun. Like, you're just like, was I smiling as much? Was I laughing as much? Yeah. And if not, then I hate that for myself and for other people who, experience that kind of loneliness. And I think one of the reasons we have that moment where we go, what were we doing before, is because we are designed for this. Like, 100%. And when we're not connected, we are operating outside of what we were designed for. And so of course we're not thriving the way we were designed to thrive. And so I think, but you talked about that a lot on Sunday, and especially how the scriptures say it, and there's, studies, but can we dive in a little bit more to even just the physiological side of why are we actually designed, like in our brains and our hardwiring, like how we're formed to connect with other people? Yeah.
Well, one of the things I love about the Bible and one of the things I love about God is one of the test of truth is to go, is there empirical evidence? Like, is there something that can substantiate this? Is there data points? Is it experientially relevant, et cetera? So if we were just to take, like, God says, as I said on Sunday, it's not good for man to be alone. All throughout the scriptures, 2 are better than 1, this, like, there's all the one another's, there's all this connection, iron sharpens iron, all that kind of stuff. So you get like, okay, that's great. That's what the Bible says. Is that just religious talk, or is there some science? Is, when we look at the physiological side, is that true? And so there's, honestly, I think, I'm sure there's, I don't know the number, but thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of research papers and studies that would point to this very point. Yeah. But I'll just share one. There's an individual by the name of Emiliana Simon Thomas. She's the director of the Greater Good Science at Berkeley. And she says she's a leading expert on neuroscience and psychology, and she's studying, like, hey, what makes us happy? What about gratitude? How does work fit into your happiness and contentment and joy? And what does it do to your physiological body when you're connected and not connected and all this kind of stuff? So purely just let's look at it from science and a physiological perspective. And here's what she says. I'm just going to read it. It's like 2 paragraphs, but it's really helpful or insightful, I think. She says, human beings are an ultra-social species, and our nervous systems expect to have others around us. In short, according to biology, neuroscience, psychology, and more, our bodies actually tend to work better when we're around, not alone. Physiologically, not having a social support system is actually a source of chronic stress for our bodies. Studies show that when people feel lonelier or are less connected, they have higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol. And that type of chronic stress raises risk of cardiovascular disease, heart disease, cancer, and impaired immune function, as well as other health problems. Conversely, relationships can encourage behaviors that are good for us, like eating right, exercise, etc. And she goes on and on. So her whole life and her PhD is in the field of neuroscience and biology and what's happening to us from a psychological perspective. And just when you look at the pure empirical data that says, okay, we're not going to put our bias on this, we're not going to put our judgments, we're not going to project on the research, we're just going to let the research project on us. You look at it and you're like, physiologically, you were designed, biologically, you were designed to be connected. And then as I cited on Sunday, which I would highly encourage people to go look at this, the Harvard Study of Adult Development, it's led by Dr. Robert Waldinger. It's the longest running study. I think it's like 80 or 90 years now on what leads to happiness in life. I mean, his number one conclusion, there's not even a close second. So make all the money you want, doesn't even compare. Get all the accomplishments, write your books, get all the notoriety, have 100 million likes, be richer than Elon Musk. It doesn't matter. Like, accomplish more than him. It just, at the end of the day, there's nothing that compares to connection. And all the research points from, part of the study was JFK was part of the study, lots of famous people who they knew as like teenagers, and they followed them all the way through their entire life until they passed away. And they said the number one thing is connection. It leads to happier lives. It leads to more fulfilling lives. And so you have the experiential side of things. You have the neuroscience. You have the biology. And it all points to go, man, if you and I could get connected, that's the source. That's where life is going to happen. That's where we're going to be most fulfilled in life. And it's when we're disconnected or we believe the lie that says, I don't need anyone. That is a myth. That is a lie. That is not true. Maybe you need to be energized because you're like me, but that is a short period of time to get the energy so you can go get reconnected.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and I would relate with you on on the introvert side of things. I'm a mega introvert. Yeah. I mean, we were having a conversation the other day where I was just dealing with some stuff, and I think I told you I'm going to go run in the woods by myself, because it's what I'm into right now is just running, and I'm going to go be completely alone where nobody else is around, because that's going to like re-energize me, which for some people sounds awful,
right?
But for me, that's like the best thing. But then I just had like a game night with some guys last night, and we finished up, and I was like, man, my soul needed that. Yeah. Like, that was so good for me. Like, I just needed to laugh. I needed to let loose, to have fun. And it was so significant. And
and for you though, and those of you watching or listening, like, Jeremy has multiple layers of connection that you take into the woods with you. So when you run alone, you're not running alone with your thoughts, just exclusively your thoughts. Like, you've sat down with friends, you've sat down with counselors, you've sat down with mentors, you've sat down with lots of people who've reflected things on whatever you've got to go run about.
Yep.
And so you're carrying that connection with you, but just you're physically being energized or re-energized or inviting God into those moments, and you do that best alone.
Yep, 100%. And to bring all those things to God, it's just where I experience that the most. And I read something recently that, like, I've in the nature of my role here at Northpoint, I've programming Sunday morning services. It's no secret that if you've been coming to Northpoint for any number of years, that we really, really value groups. And so we do 2 Sundays a year where we give an opportunity for people to get in groups. And I read something recently that for me just validated that on a huge level as to why we spend so much energy pushing people towards community. And it broke down kind of where character development happens in our brain. And we think about the right and left side of the brain. We talk about this on Sundays sometimes, but the left side of our brain is oftentimes where we like receive information. It's logic, it's words, it's language, it's speech, all of that. And there have been studies to go, well, where does character change? Where does character improve? And all the studies would point to, like, it actually happens in the right side of our brain. The information's important, but where the character truly changes is in the right side, which is in experiences, connections, memories, emotion, all of that. And so the studies would say that, like, your character, you change as a person, you improve as a person, not because of the information that you are pulling and all the content. I mean, we live in a content world, and I love content and all that, but you change because of the connections that you have and how people are pushing you in a different direction. That literally changes your brain, and that's how your character develops.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I thought that was just so significant for me. I was like, this is why we can stand on stage all the time, or we can share things on Sunday morning and go, this is how you have a better marriage, this is how you follow Jesus, this is how you grow in your all of these things. But ultimately, if someone does not Like your brain is not designed to grow significantly in that way. It's designed to be with other people and their lives. You bump into one another, you do things together, and that's how you grow.
Well, yeah, and even like ideas, like, man, here's what I think philosophically, here's what I think theologically, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Like, I always make the statement, this is as far as my thoughts have gotten me. This is as far as I can like stretch my brain to like, here's my theology, here's my doctrine.
Right.
But I'm always trying to invite like people with opposing viewpoints, people who would disagree, or people who would agree, or maybe have different variations, because that's the connection in community. There's like this free market system of ideas.
Yep.
And it's like this idea to go, wow, like I never thought of it that way, or man, I haven't thought about how this verse connects, and how it pulls into the theological overall outcome, and wow, these are, and it's that accountability too, to go like, hey, I've got to go read, and I've got to go understand what I actually believe.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to meet with these people, or I'm going to meet with this group, or we're going to talk, or this person completely disagrees with what I'm thinking. And, it's always challenging connection versus I can convince myself of pretty crazy things, by myself, and just go like, hey, these all make sense in my mind. So they must make, be what's absolutely true.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Knowing this is how we're wired, it's kind of a paradox to me, and it's a little perplexing to think that like, this does not happen naturally. Like it's like our world, the way it's designed, our culture, it just seems like it does not necessarily always encourage these kind of connections, even though social media and modern technology is like, we're going to be more connected than ever, and yet we're more lonely than ever. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you feel like culture is not fully set up for us to be connected? And even just how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, I think it's super layered. I think you and I were talking about, and I think you've got some insights on this. Like, I think there's been like major cultural shifts. I think the Industrial Revolution has taken, the families from the farms and all this kind of stuff where we were all connected, and now we're very individualistic and all that kind of stuff. So there's layers and layers and layers to this. I also think there's, I think, and this is more of a recent development, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, there's less self-evident truths in our life. In other words, there was a time we would say these are self-evident. Like, I don't have to pull out the Bible. I don't have to talk about, like, there's something outside of you and outside of me that determines what's objective, because we're going to get it wrong all the time. We've got to go to the transcendent, something that is much bigger and much more divine than us, to give us what's true, which then shapes our views of morality, our views of right and wrong, our views of sexuality, and all these kind of things. Well, today, there is no self-evident truths, or it's lacking, if you will. That's maybe too far of a statement. There is no. But it's lacking. So like, there's not a lot of common ground. And your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth. And there's so much subjectivity to find these elements of common ground. And these elements of common ground give us a lot of connection, give us a lot of like, hey, we agree. So let's talk, let's go have dinner. Like, and even the self-evident truth that you have intrinsic worth. And now we're in this cancel culture to say, like, the idea to go, if your ideas don't agree with mine, then I have the right to cancel you, because there is no self-evident truth that you have intrinsic value and worth. And if you don't have intrinsic value and worth, that doesn't come from me, that doesn't come from your ideas or my ideas, but comes from outside of both of us, from the transcendent divine that made you in his image, that gives you, divine worth and value, then it's just ideas. Yeah. And your ideas threaten my way of life. Your ideas threaten my views. Your ideas threaten my morality, or whatever it may be. So logically, why not cancel you? And so it's like we just operate at a very surface level quite often, because there's a lack of alignment. There's a lack of unity, which there once was around these self-evident truths in our culture.
And there's not a lot of space to agree to disagree.
Exactly.
There's just giant like walls between camps and ways of thought and thinking. Is like, it's almost like it feels like it's not an option sometimes for someone to be like, well, I'm politically left, well, I'm politically right, and we can still be friends. It's like, oh, well, then I guess we can't like do life together.
Right, which is the best kind of like, that's the best. That's where I was talking about earlier. Like, if you have intrinsic value and worth, or I can pull from something, it may not have to be divine, but I don't know how you actually logically or objectively get there without the divine entering in the space to say you have objective worth and value. But if I at least can substantiate that somewhere in my mind, then I can sit with you and be friends, even though you're far left and I'm far right, or I'm far left and you're far right. It's like, and then guess what? I learn. I discover that maybe there's
empathy in there too.
Yeah, and there's 20% of what you're saying that I'm like, oh, you know what? On my, ultra right or ultra left or ultra religious or ultra, not religious, it's just the universe or whatever. It's like, man, we can learn from one another if we start with some of these self-evident truths, and it allows us to go deeper. It allows us to experience intimacy. It allows me to trust you more.
Yep.
And I think that's part of it. It's a layer. It's not the silver bullet. And then I think the other part is just natural fear of being known.
Yeah.
I just don't. I fear like if you're going to really know me, you're going to reject me. So let's keep this surface level.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to. And that is a really lonely place, because we made the statement before, if no one truly knows you, then no one really likes you, because no one knows the real you. And that is a really lonely space. And that, cortisol and all the stress and all the anxiety and I can't sleep well and, all this stuff starts hitting on you because you're not physically designed to be alone.
Yeah. I want to camp on that, but I have one thought to add to just the discussion about why, how culture is set up. Going back to what you said about like industrialization and all of that too. I just think there's what has been lost is that this naturally occurred in history, in the sense of like tribal mentality, and there were natural elders in the tribe that you would learn from, almost like the way we talk about counseling. Like that was almost built into the fabric of how people, their culture was designed. Think about the like you said, farming on, families that were farming together versus now moving to the city, and then individualistic mentality of like, it's every man for themselves in a family unit. That just feels like it's, when you look at history, what researchers would say, like that's been a shift in the last century for the most part. And so it's almost like now today it's not woven into the fabric of our culture that like these connections are just built in and they're natural. So that's why you have to pay somebody to listen to your problems now. You know what I mean? Like,
instead of like grandpa, or instead of like the cousin or the uncle or the aunt that was like brilliant and wise and had great life experience.
Exactly. Or even just the option to move wherever you want in the world is awesome, but that means that you're going to be disconnected from the, your roots and, all that kind of stuff. And so, so that you would have grown more deep relationships with grandpa, grandma, that kind of thing, but now you have to pay somebody because they live on the other side of the country. And so, I don't know, to me, it's just like, it's mind-boggling to think about it, that way. But
sure.
I also want to hone in on the person who is listening or watching that, and maybe we can wrap up with this question, who has been known and been hurt. And, our natural response as humans is we want to gravitate towards safety and what's comfortable. I mean, that's how our brains are wired. But someone's been hurt by a community. They've had connections and then they've been wounded. And so the natural response is like, well, I'm not going to be open to this then. I'm just going to, close the door. I'm not going to let people in. What would you say to that person? What would you say to that individual listening? Or
Yeah, I think, that's the risk of intimacy, and that's my cognitive response to it.
Yeah.
And then I think my compassionate response would, which I should have started with, which would, be far more because I have experienced that as well. I would just be like, man, like I would reach out and go like, that's one of the most painful that's one of the most painful things to experience, is that relational hurt. That's one of the most, like the deepest soulish levels, is to be able to like extend trust, to be able to extend, relational intimacy, to be able to spend that time that you're never going to get back, and somebody crushes that, or somebody abuses that, or somebody hurts that. And that's painful at a different level. And I would just say, man, I'm really sorry if you've gone through that. And I have felt that, and I would want to be right with you. I would say like, and I do think there's a time to take a step back and pause. I don't think it's like, man, I've been hurt, so I need to get in another relationship. I do think there's a time to pause and reflect and I would encourage you to invite God in. He knows most of all what it feels like to be rejected. Jesus was totally and utterly rejected on the cross. He knows that space in your soul and your heart. And so I would invite him into that. And then, ultimately I would just say, more from the cognitive piece, is that, anything you can do, or to give yourself some logical examples of not giving up on the very gift that would actually give life to you again. And, there's lots of examples of things like, hey, I drank a bad glass of water, which I'm not comparing these, but I'm never going to drink again. I've ate a bad, piece of food I'm never going to eat again. as much as water and food sustain your life and nourish you, relationships do the same thing. So logically speaking, you would never give up on those things. Those things are going to nourish and replenish and give you the strength to go on tomorrow, food and water. You are physiologically built in the exact same way when it comes to relational connection. And so I do think it's like, like we talked about this Sunday, giving another shot to go, hey, here's an opportunity. Like as a church, that's what I said at the end of the time, is to go, we want to just create opportunities, create these bridges for you to take that step. And perhaps that's another risk. It's a genuine risk because we're all, as the scriptures say, we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We are all fully capable, starting with me, of hurting another relationship. But it's the very thing that nourishes me and gives me life. So, it's the thing to go, perhaps step into men's group or a women's group and go, invite God in and say, God, I'm going to trust you. And then I do think over time it would, to be praying about intentionally connecting with 3 or 4, 2 to 3 people that you would say are aligned in terms of what we're talking about with character. So they're pushing you towards not their opinions, their ideas, or affirming you because they're too insecure to tell you what's true of you, but they have enough security because they find their security in who their Heavenly Father says they are to be able to reflect the loving truth to you, and you can reflect the loving truth to them. So you need 2 or 3 relationships in your life that are pursuing characters, we're defining it, that are pushing you, that are encouraging you, that are spurring you, that are loving you. And I think having those is one of those things that gives you a base or a foundation then to go connect in different relationships. And you're going to get hurt from time to time, but then you've got these 2 to 3 that you can go back and you can lament, you can confess, you can say, I'm hurt, you can be real, you can be intimate, you can be honest. And these 2 to 3 in your life can remind you of the things that are true of you and empathize with you and meet you from compassionate, cognitive moments and just be in that space. And so I would also encourage if you don't have that and you're listening or watching, ask God for that. And it's wild how you begin to see what you're looking for, and you begin to see what you're asking God for. Yeah. You're like, man, God, I'd love to have those 2 to 3 very trusting, very intimate, very aligning relationships where somebody, loves me enough to like speak into, in a loving way, is aligned with the character definition, man, is going to spur me on towards love and good deeds. Okay, don't have that. So invite that into your life. That gives you a base. And then, yeah, I hate it. I hate it when the relational hurts at a deeper level, because again, it's part of our design. And ultimately, I would just say, don't give up on it. Don't give up. Just as you would in food or water, you can't give up on a relationship.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to wrap up. And I would just point people to the resource that we talked about on Sunday, and really just to go to mpaustin.com /groups, and you can find out tons of information on groups. Groups are our way of trying to create opportunities for this kind of connection we're talking about. And for someone going, I'm not going to join it, you can join and you can quit if you need to. Like, that's totally fine too. Some people join a group and they're like, oh, this one doesn't mesh, and then they find a different one and they feel like they connect a lot better. But yeah, it's gotta be intentional. You gotta take a step at some point. I love the question you asked at the end, just, are you connected? And if someone's listening and they're going, no, then you gotta be intentional. You gotta do something with that. And it is going to be hard if there's baggage, if there's past. And but yeah, I would just don't give up, like you said. Definitely take a step and get in a group.
Absolutely.
So, awesome. We're going to be wrapping up the series this Sunday, part 4, choose your character, and I'm excited to hear what you're going to have, Buck.
Giddy up.
All right.
Thank you, man.